horses that just threw me off. Bombastic side-eye. Criminal offensive side-eye.
Hello and welcome back to the Inside Track. If you are new here, my name is Anna and I talk about all the things when it comes to the equestrian industry. The controversies, the call-outs, and the conversations nobody's wanting to have, I'm here to have them. So if that sounds like your cup of tea, sit down, grab a snack, and let's chat. Today we're going somewhere that I've honestly been putting off for a little while because it's a pretty big topic, hence why it's being posted here on YouTube. And it's also pretty easy to get wrong because there are so many narratives and factors at play. But I keep coming back to it because it genuinely bothers me and I think it should bother you too. We're talking about horse abuse. Not just in one place, not just in one discipline, but globally. And we're specifically talking about the excuse that gets used over and over and over again to shut down any real conversation about it. And that is the excuse of, that's just their culture. And let me just say, in the grand old year of 2026, with all the tools we have quite literally at our fingertips, what a lame excuse. Real quick before we dive in, I am not trying to point fingers or undermine other cultures, nor am I pretending that the US has it all together. We absolutely do not, and we very much have our own skeletons in our own closets as well, which I will also touch upon in this video. But we can't pretend like these issues aren't happening globally, and we cannot have tunnel vision when it comes to equine welfare. The reason why this needs to be talked about more, especially given the fact that everything is so easily accessible and seen online, is if we don't genuinely address the issues happening globally, more and more people will think this type of behavior is okay, and more mistreatment will seep into everyday practices. Not to say that some people would truly incorporate some of these horrible practices or behaviors in their own barns, but many people will most likely have the mentality of, well, there's places in the world that treat their horses far worse, so my horse is basically being treated like royalty, when in reality, their horse is stalled 24/7, worked like crazy to the point they'll have to probably retire at 11, and ridden and trained completely backwards, which is its own type of horror house. But now that I have that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into it. Let's start with a little bit of what's actually going on around the world. I'm going to be including some examples of some equine welfare concerns that happen in different parts of the world that is often brushed off as tradition and culture. Let's start with Mexican horse dancing. Mexican horse dancing is a practice that has been circulating a lot on social media lately. The tradition of horses dancing in parades or in celebrations, they're very popular in Mexican culture, and it can look really impressive on the surface. The horse steps really high, almost like a pee-off you would see in dressage, and there's often music and celebration around it. And I think that last part is why so many people pass on it, because the horse looks like they're just performing and part of the celebration. But in reality, the steps it took for the horse to get there is where this becomes extremely concerning. In many cases, these horses are trained to do this by having their heads tied down, using tight side reins or tie downs that crank their head into an unnatural fixed position so the horse physically cannot escape the pressure. And then they're asked to go forward with no place to go through excessive whipping, which results in an extremely scared horse that is basically trotting in place. Sometimes the horse is even left tied to cross ties and asked to dance for extremely long periods of time, where the trainer is asking for higher and faster steps through, you guessed it, excessive whipping, which only results in an even more anxious and panicked horse. What makes this particularly frustrating is how many people use these methods and ultimately their horses suffering as content to be posted with pride onto their social media platforms. As you can imagine, their comment section is a war zone. You have people calling it out for what it is, and you have people applauding it and defending it as their culture. Just because it is part of tradition and part of their culture, it does not mean we can't understand how to do better. There are ways you can achieve this dance without excessive and abusive practices we see here today. Next on the list is Buzkashi. Buzkashi, not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it is a traditional sport played in Central Asia in areas like Afghanistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and parts of Pakistan. It's been around for over 1,000 years, and it's a huge part of the cultural identity in those regions. The basic idea is that riders on horseback compete to grab a goat or calf carcass and get it to a goal. So yes, you heard that right, they're using a dead animal as a ball. They say it originated from various tribes stealing goats and other animals, and they, I guess, decided to turn it into a sport for funsies, because that's fun.
Offensive side eye.
And while it is an exciting traditional event, it is brutal on horses. We're talking horses being whipped and kicked and pushed at full gallop in attempt to get the dead goat into the goal, and it oftentimes results in these dog piles made out of horses. And as you can imagine, there are a lot of injuries that occur at these events. This sport could be so much better and safer if there were just a few more rules, regulations, and I don't know, not having horses throwing themselves into a semi-solid object carrying a dead body. Even just having more vets on site to evaluate horses after a major hit would make a real difference. But instead, it gets written off as that's just how it's done, the horses are fine, and if they're not fine, they just weren't cut out for it. Which might be a lot easier to accept if their lives and comfort wasn't the thing being put on the line here. Next on the list is Indian relay racing. Indian relay racing is one of the oldest equestrian traditions in Native American communities, and for a lot of horses and riders, it's genuinely thrilling to watch. But there's real welfare concerns here that get brushed off as this is tradition and horses are tougher than you think. Which is so funny to me because I'm pretty sure my potato with toothpicks as legs tried to die from playing in his water trough. Truly don't know how horses got the reputation that they're tough as nails when they try to off themselves every chance they get. I digress. For those of you that aren't familiar with this event, these relay races involve riders switching between 3 horses at a full gallop with no saddle. Basically, the race starts with horses on one end of the track and they're off at a full gallop to make their first loop around the track. Once they finish their first loop, the rider hops off the horse is caught by the catcher, and the rider runs and hops onto a second horse waiting on the rail and continues off at a gallop to finish their next loop around the track. They do this a total of 3 times using 1 rider, 1 catcher, 2 holders, and 3 horses total. As you can imagine, throughout this process, crashes unfortunately happen, and they can be brutal for both the riders or handlers and the horses involved. Something else to consider is how stressful this situation is for a horse that is a flight animal. I mean, it's in their instinct to run away and panic when something literally jumps onto their back in the way these jockeys do. It probably looks and feels a lot like how maybe a mountain lion would when they're trying to eat their next meal, which is nightmare fuel for a horse, no matter how desensitized they are to it. I know racing gets a lot of talk within the animal welfare community, and those concerns are understandable to an extent. And this relay race does follow a lot of similar guidelines in an attempt to keep the horses safe, like making sure all facilities are approved, reviewing track conditions, enforcing horse health requirements, and having vets on site for pre- and post-event checks. Which is all good and dandy, but surely running and jumping onto horses and sometimes even crashing through these groups isn't the best way to keep horses' safety a #1 priority. I know this race is traditional and a huge part of their culture, but surely there's a way in which we can look at how the horse jockey switches are done and find ways to make it less chaotic and not have the crashes. Honoring a tradition and making it safer can coexist. Next on the list is tourist traps with horses. Imagine you're on a vacation and for some reason there is an opportunity to go on a ride, whether that be on the trails, on the beach, or even near a big tourist attraction. There's somehow a trail riding business offering their services to tourists. Unfortunately though, a lot of the horses used for these trail riding adventures are in genuinely heartbreaking condition. And I strongly believe that because the greater population who travel to these destinations also don't know a ton about horse welfare, these businesses prey on that and use it to their advantage. Many of these horses who are seen at these popular tourist spots have open sores, some are clearly lame, some are showing ribs and otherwise weak and malnourished, and most work in brutal heat with little to no breaks from the sun or from even being ridden. And before I talk more about this, I do want to address the economic argument here because it comes up time and time again, and it is important. Yes, poverty is real, and poverty is most often tied to a lack of education and understanding in what these horses need in order to thrive. I understand not everyone has access to a vet or quality feed, nor does everyone have access to an education that makes these owners and handlers understand the importance of proper horse care. However, there is a difference between doing your best with limited resources and just not caring. Sorry, not sorry, it does not take a veterinarian veterinarian with a PhD to tell you a horse that is severely lame or to tell you that a horse that has their hip bones showing should probably not be ridden or worked. A wound that's been left open for weeks under an old, filthy saddle pad, that isn't a poverty or education issue, that is neglect. If you're ever somewhere that offers trail rides to tourists, just skip it. Even if the horses look healthy and well kept, you still have no idea what their day-to-day life actually looks like when they go back to the barn and the tourists go home. You could easily be giving your money to a literal house of horrors without even knowing it. Now let's talk about horse ownership in rural America and what a lot of people in this industry call a backyard barn. Believe it or not, there are still a lot of horses that are very accessible, relatively cheap to buy, and once you get the horse home, there is almost zero regulation or oversight in the management and care of that horse. I mean, you can go on Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist right now and find horses being sold for dirt cheap or given away for free. No questions asked to people with no experience, no true understanding of what it takes to even have a horse, and no real plan. And again, I want to say this very clearly, most of these people are not monsters. Most people have good intentions, but they just lack the education. A lot of them genuinely love their horses, or at least they think they do. The biggest issue I see with backyard barns in America is the overwhelming misunderstanding in what a horse actually needs in order to thrive and be genuinely happy. A horse requires constant access to forage, enough space to run and stretch their legs, the ability to socialize with other animals, access to routine care like with the farrier and the vet, as well as a safe space to be exercised and ridden in appropriate tack. Because let's be real, nobody in rural America is buying a horse just to have as a pet. They're buying them to accomplish their dreams as a horseback rider, which is fine and great, but we have to cover our bases for the horse's sake. I see so many horses in rural America that are kept in people's literal backyards that are extremely underweight, that aren't looked after properly, that are ridden in tack that is genuinely offensive, and they're more often than not seen as machines and not as living, breathing animals with boundaries, complex emotions, and the ability to actually communicate if we dare listen. Tack situation is its whole own thing. These people's tack setups are truly nightmare fuel, and I'm not kidding you when I say that it keeps me up at night. Almost everyone is in severe bits in inexperienced hands on very green horses, and nobody's saying anything because half the barn is doing the exact same thing. And when a $40 saddle mixed with a 15-inch gag is giving the horse chronic pain and he starts acting out, the horse gets labeled as dangerous instead of anyone stopping to ask why.
What's also frustrating is the lack of knowledge surrounding legitimate riding skills. I mean, most people who ride just get on the horse and hope for the best. Most are not even taught the basics of posting, or how to hold the reins, or the importance of putting your heels down. Not knowing how to keep yourself safe and balanced in the saddle will ruin the ride for both horse and rider at one point or another. I know that everyone has to start somewhere, and I know that not everyone has the resources or funds to spend on weekly riding lessons, but there are still so many free resources online that could seriously help so many horses and their riders.
It's a good day for a wet saddle pad. Crazy things I do as a cowgirl, ride horses that just threw me off. Things that I do as a cowgirl, I tell 1,500-pound animals how they're gonna act. Are you good? Yeah, we ain't having none of that. We ain't having none of that. You ready to listen? Still not ready to listen. We gotta do it again. You're so lucky I don't have a whip. Back up, back up, back up, back up, back up.
But the thing that makes this all so frustrating is if you push back on any of it, you automatically get painted as a snob who probably took lessons at some fancy barn. I understand that it's hard to accept criticism, especially when it's not asked for, but people commenting valid and legitimate concerns and advice are not doing it for the sake of being judgmental or to prove to others they're better. No, they're doing it because they want to see both horse and rider thrive. And just because the owner doesn't see any issue with it doesn't mean it's not there. Now that we've gone over some examples, let's take a look at understanding why this excuse of culture is so prevalent across the globe. When we look at why it's hard to criticize practices in other cultures or other communities, it's very understandable. It was developed as a pushback against colonialism and the assumption that the Western norms are universally right, when sometimes, most of the time, they weren't. White people were just very stubborn and were offended by how others lived their lives and decided they had to change it, even if it meant killing off whole civilizations. But let's not get into that today. Anyway, here's where this mentality completely falls apart when we apply it to animals. It assumes that everyone in a given culture is okay with the methods we see. That's almost never true, statistically speaking anyways. In every country, in every community where these things happen, there are most likely people on the inside who hate it, who also want it to change, and who are already advocating against it. And we go, well, who are we to say? We're actually silencing those voices along with our own. That's a double whammy of big no-nos. It also assumes that critique equals control, and that's just not true. Saying I think this is wrong is not the same as forcing anyone to do anything. We are just talking. And talking matters, especially when our horses do not have the ability to voice their concerns. We need to be the ones to step in and better advocate for them. Speaking of advocating for them, how can we go about doing that, especially if we are halfway across the world? Social media is genuinely one of the most powerful tools we have for this stuff. The best part about social media is visibility. 20 years ago, abuse at a tourist site in Morocco or a backyard venue in Mississippi was basically invisible to anyone outside that immediate community. But today, one video can reach millions of people in a matter of hours. And we have watched social media be the spearhead in driving real change within this community. I mean, just look at the Justice for Cobain case where Shannon Eckel left her horse hung in his stall and left to die. She is now banned from participating in all sanctioned events. Her reputation as a trainer is ruined, and now more and more horses and their owners will not need to be a witness or victim to her abuse. That is a real example of social media creating accountability when the system wasn't moving fast enough. Social media also connects people across communities who would never have found each other under normal circumstances. Someone in rural Georgia who's suddenly coming to the realization about her horse's unfortunate situation can now find a welfare organization to report her barn, a trainer willing to work with different methods, and a multiple equestrian forums filled with education, experience, and knowledge, all from their phone. If you don't feel comfortable posting online or creating an online footprint, there are some other options that I will have linked for you down in the description below for how you could better advocate for animal welfare. With all that being said, horses have been part of human life for thousands of years and for hundreds of generations. Across every culture, every continent, and every community we talked about today, there are so many versions and interpretations of what a healthy relationship looks like between people and horses. But even if people come from different backgrounds and have different identities, traditions, and cultures, we need to ensure horse welfare is encouraged, understood, and dispersed from community to community for the sake of the horse. Anyways, this is the end of this video. Thanks so much for watching. If you did enjoy it, don't forget to like and subscribe, and please feel free to leave your thoughts down below in the comment section. Thanks again for watching. See you next time. Bye.